So this is a little bit of a test, really, to see if everything's working. So if you're catching this stream at some point in the future, I'm going to be streaming once a week from now on, really, just to try and force myself to do a little bit of hobby. It always sounds strange when we talk about having to force ourselves to do our hobby, but I think we all kind of know that the reality is that finding time is never as easy as we'd like it to be, is it? Just playing around a little bit with the tech because I'm not sure if anything's actually coming through on Twitch. I can see everything's streaming fine on YouTube, but Twitch is a little bit of an anomaly to me. I'm just getting a black screen, but I think we're going to persevere and just see how it goes. So for the stream, I thought I'd test out the equipment, just set up the desk, just set up the camera. Focus, I think, is going to be an issue. A lot of my lenses have got a fairly shallow depth of field, so it's going to be a bit of a challenge for me when doing these streams about making sure I hold things in a sensible focus area, but this doesn't seem too bad, to my eyes at least. And then the next question, obviously, was what to stream for the first thing. And I've had this Marauder skeleton sat around for, like, I don't know, 15 years maybe. So it kind of felt maybe it was about time to get some paint on the old thing and really just give it some life. So only going to do an hour today, really just to get started and see where we go from there. But I'm going to set myself a little alarm so that I don't massively run over, because again, we all know what it's like once we start doing hobby. We have to force ourselves to get started sometimes, but once we're underway, there's very rarely an easy stopping point. So we'll do 60 minutes of hobby and then call it quits for the day. So when thinking about colours for this model, I want to kind of stick to a fairly sort of really desaturated look, with a couple of key exceptions where I'm going to add kind of like a bit of a green glow coming from the skeletal eyes and inside the kind of gaps in the skeletal armour, as if there's some magical force at the centre holding it all together, as you'd imagine there would need to be to bring a skeleton back to fight. But other than that, just trying to stick to really desaturated blues and browns. The metallics are going to be interesting, so I'm going to kind of go for a kind of bronze, dark silver kind of look, as if this was before the advent of steel and that kind of thing, to really give that kind of Iron Age, Bronze Age feel to it, which I think kind of goes with the Marauder style. It's all got that look of kind of high antiquity rather than high fantasy. But for now, I just want to get started with some basic colours on the core areas, like the cloak. Might try and get the cloak done for its entirety in this stream. For that kind of desaturated look, I want to go for blues, but I want to use kind of blue greys. And for that, I'm predominantly thinking sort of Payne's grey, dark grey blue, and grey blue, all from Pro Acryl Monument Hobbies. I started using these paints kind of earlier this year, and I've been really impressed with them, I have to admit. Like really, really solid colours, really good coverage, and I know they're not everyone's cup of tea, but I really like the bottle design. Like, not your classic dropper bottles, I grant you. These kind of screw top jobs, where you kind of twist them to open them up. Although if you twist them like that, you screw the whole thing off. There we go. Just twist them like that to get the paint out. But actually, I find them, in terms of sort of application onto a wet palette, to be really good. I think my wet palette is slightly overly wet, as it's sort of seeping everywhere at the moment, but that's okay. It can usually just kind of zhuzh it back together if we need to, although that is running everywhere. Right, let's get some paint on here for the first time on stream. I really like these older Marauder miniatures, to be honest. I think partially for their slightly kind of soft detailing. I find a lot of modern miniatures, like, they're awesome. It's incredible what can be sculpted now. But certainly for my eyes, I can't paint a lot of the detail on the newer miniatures. There's just too much going on for me to actually be able to sort of quickly and easily read shapes and volumes and things like that. So whenever I get the opportunity to kind of go back and paint one of these older miniatures, when, yes, you know what, they probably would have put more detail on them if they could at the time, if the tech was there to support it. But I kind of feel like, because it was a case of it was all sculpted by hand and by eye, it matches up pretty well with what I can paint by eye, without great difficulty. To stress, that doesn't mean I paint it well, but it does mean, I don't know, it's just a nice simplicity in the shapes, in what's actually included on the miniature. Everything's here for a purpose. Everything that was put into putty, everything that was sculpted, serves a purpose in telling the story of the miniature. I feel like that's maybe something we don't talk about enough when we talk about painting miniatures, is about the story of the miniature that we're painting. Like I said, sort of when I was talking about what we were looking to do in this stream, about, to me, this miniature has the look of high antiquity rather than high fantasy. Now obviously it's a skeleton. It's clearly a fantasy miniature, but just in terms of the armor, the shape of the helmet, the weapon, it lacks a lot of the classic fantasy tropes, and instead kind of leans into that kind of Conan or sort of Age of the Barbarian stuff. That again very much is part of the fantasy genre, I guess, but visually leans far more into that kind of Age of Antiquity and the Lost Worlds and that kind of thing than it does fantasy. And I think that's, certainly to me, when I'm looking at for miniatures to paint and then deciding how I'm going to paint them, those are the things that I look for. And sometimes a slightly simpler miniature is easier in that regard to find that story, because you don't have to, you're not fighting the fact that there's a bunch of iconography to a specific group or game or a specific time period on it. And there are times when all those things are very, very positive. Classic example being kind of big games like Warhammer. You want your faction to have dedicated miniatures. You want, whether it's special characters, whether it's shoulder pads with squad markings or chapter markings, if you're painting Space Marines, all that kind of thing is awesome. But I personally, just purely from a miniature painting perspective, find all of those to be limiting factors rather than major gains. All those sort of opportunities for freedom kind of get subsumed to the gaming purpose, if you will. Which again is not inherently a bad thing, it's just a preference thing, right? I think it's fair to say that back when these Marauder minis were made, there was less consideration given to the practical reality of using these things for gaming, and much more focus given to is this a cool looking mini or not? Is there now a place for that business? I don't know, but I like to think so. And certainly whenever I now get the opportunity to paint these, I really look forward to it. Now, in true not planning properly style, I haven't actually put enough putty on the bottom of this miniature to hold it to the handle. You can probably see it wobbling all over the place. So I am just going to grab a whole bunch of putty and pop that on there and get this thing stuck down properly. One moment. must admit, one thing I've found since getting back into the hobby is the space for handles, for hobby handles, has kind of gone nuts. It used to just be that you held on to the base of your miniature, or certainly it was when I was sort of learning to paint anyway in the hobby. Now there's this whole market for for things just to put your mini onto, which is actually really cool. I really like this Redgrass Games one that I got in a hobby box a little while ago. Really, really sort of helpful to be able to get some distance between you and the mini and not be constantly sticking your fingers in the paint. Plus, this one has this little swivelly top that I've been using a lot in this to try and look around the mini. But setting the handle aside for a minute, that Payne's grey colour is such a nice addition to the Pro Acryl line. It's one of their signature ones. I want to say it got added, by the Vince Vintarella collection. It's such a nice sort of really dark shadow colour for blues, for greys, for blacks. I have been loving using this thing. Really just absolutely loving it. I'm just going to mop up a little bit on my wet palette because they seem to be just slowly sinking into the sea. I've got the wet palette of Atlantis over here. When they say, oh, you should get your wet palette absolutely soaking wet, there is a limit. And when your paint runs across the entire surface of it the minute it touches the palette, you kind of know you've gone too far with the adding of water to it. There we are. That feels much better. And hopefully put some paint down on that, and it'll actually stay in one place now. Speaking of which, let's move on to this dark grey blue, the next colour. These are all actually new bottles, so I'm having to take the seals off these as I go. This is actually another thing that I really like about Pro Acryl paints. I bought I go through a lot of this colour, so I bought a bunch at the same time, and because they're all individually sealed rather than just by the lid, they last super well. I bought this bottle maybe 6-7 months ago. There are brands that we shan't name that are very expensive paint-wise, who, if you bought a bottle for 6 or 7 months, it would dry up in the pot, even if it had never been opened, without a shadow of a doubt. No, I really like these, actually. They seal well, they keep well, and they just go on so nicely. These and the AK 3rd gen, I guess, are the ones that I would say that to. I love the Vallejo game color and model color. Though to be honest, I know model color is supposed to be the better paints. I've had a much better experience with game color than I have with model color, if I'm honest. And the other side of being honest about that is that may well just be down to my lack of skill. As a painter, that is definitely an option. But for me personally, I find them to be nicer paints to work with, just easier. And that, I suppose maybe that's the thing, is that if ease of use is what you're looking for, then often the best in any space is actually aimed at people for whom that is not the be all and end all, for whom end of project quality is the priority, not necessarily ease of getting there. And hey, that's entirely fair enough. That's never going to be me. I am about enjoying what I'm doing, and for me that usually means making the process as easy as possible. I have no real interest in labouring with a tool or a paint just because it's great doesn't make it right for me. Chimera is a great example of this. I bought a pretty much full set of Chimera and all the expansions, and it's undeniably phenomenal quality, second literally to none, I think, in terms of the technical quality of the paint. But I use it incredibly rarely, simply because I don't want to deal with it. It's a lot of work. Like you have to paint. Oh, this is going to come out wrong, but you have to paint properly. You have to paint like a professional painter. Um, I feel like you have to be very confident in your command of color, your reading of volumes, and that kind of thing. And I'm not. I do want the easy mode, as it were. I want colors that I don't have to sort of endlessly mix to get the shade that I want. Um, and that's not to say that again that I'm right and they're wrong or anything like that. It's just a preference thing, and that I think the quality has very little to do these days in miniature painting with the paint themselves, and there's more to do with what we want to use them for. I think there are outliers. I tried using the let me get some down. I tried using these not long ago. These Dungeons and Dragons branded army. I think army painter paints. Yeah. If I'm being honest, I just found these to be dreadful. Like really bad paints, poor coverage, poor consistency, didn't thin well, didn't mix well. Sort of no matter, when you've got one of those tools where it's just like no matter what you try and do with it, you can't find a place for it in what you're doing. Which is tricky because I was given an absolute load of them by some colleagues when I left a previous job, and I was looking forward to giving them a go and just really couldn't get along with them. Let me know if you use these or normal army painter paints and have kind of cracked the secret into sort of how you should be using them and why I'm struggling so much with them. Let me know, because I would love to make use of them. I hate waste, especially when it comes to something like miniature paint. Miniature paint's expensive enough that I don't want to waste it. So if there's something I don't know that you've figured out, please let me know. The upside to those was that they came with some paintbrushes and some models. The models particularly made me very happy. There's this dude with a sword and a cat. The fact that he's got a cat is very exciting to me. But more importantly than that, came with an owlbear, the best monster in D&D ever. So that's super exciting and definitely going to be a stream at some point where I paint that. But anyway, back to Mr. Skeleton. This is his show after all. We're not talking about owlbears today. I'm gonna keep going on with some of these, some of this grey blue. But yeah, as you can probably see, I wasn't joking earlier or being what do you call it, self-deprecating. Like, I'm not a hugely talented painter, but I like to enjoy myself getting a paintbrush out whenever I can. It's especially with models like this, I just sort of feel that it's just nice to be getting them out, getting paint on them again, to be honest. And in terms of the streaming, I think it's just it'll be helpful for me to maybe hold myself accountable to something, share the journey a little bit as I get back into the hobby. I really used to absolutely love painting miniatures, playing games, whether it was at my local games workshop or a wargaming store or a club in the area. Sort of all through the early 90s, early 2000s, even up to kind of the mid 2000s, really. It was sort of my primary hobby, as it were. And I think, as happens to almost everyone in the hobby, there's the gap, right? Whether it's work or, for me, meeting my wife and moving away, or any number of things, really. Life just kind of takes over. And I think it can be a struggle to find time to sit down and paint and play with toy soldiers. It's not a massively complex idea, I suppose, really, is it? But I'm pleased with how this is coming along. And this is again one of the reasons I really like Pro Acryl, is they're just so forgiving. Like, I've just thrown those two colours on. One wasn't dry before the next. They've kind of mixed together quite well on the model. Both are a little bit too thinned down, but yet the coverage has remained pretty good. Apologies for the general lack of ability in terms of keeping this thing in focus, but I am going to work on that, I promise. But yeah, hopefully the colours are coming through okay on camera. They look alright, at least to me. But do let me know in the comments if it's not clear, or if there's any advice around improving the stream is always welcome. It's funny, I do a lot of this stuff in my job, and yet actually trying to set one up at home with fairly limited resources, really not easy. So yeah, very. It's kind of reminded me how impressive it is that those who stream all the time put out such good quality stuff. There we go. Little bit of tea to fuel the next step. So I think with this, what I don't want to do is go quite as high as the sort of full-on light grey. I feel like that's going to start taking away from that desaturated look, just for the sheer amount of white. Like, it's certainly a very desaturated colour, but I think the kind of I want to use the word luminance, but I feel like that's probably incorrect, and someone, this being the internet, will quite rightly correct me for my misuse of the wrong word, or misuse of the word, I should say. The value on this just seems very high. It seems very bright. So what I'm thinking is, instead I'll mix it in to that grey, that dark grey blue, and see where I land, somewhere in the middle, and go from there. Again, it's only a very rough, quick paint job anyway. Again, especially with that kind of, I want it to feel beat up. I want that sort of antiquated feel to it. I feel like often that kind of allows you to paint in a fairly sketchy manner, in the same way that kind of those kind of 80s Age of Fantasy, Age of Conan sort of graphics used to portray things. Less detail, more idea. Always really liked that stuff. So hopefully we can capture just some of that in this when we're done. Just really trying to go in now with fairly quick sketching motions, just to catch the very tallest parts, or the very tallest is the wrong word, the highest parts of these cloaks. Must admit, another fairly recent change to my painting setup has been the addition of these Artis Opus brushes. I've always been a very staunch Winsor and Newton user. Really, since when I was in the hobby last time around, I never really started using any others. I just went straight from workshop right the way to Winsor & Newton Series 7 straight away. And then just at Christmas, my wife bought me a set of Series S brushes from Artis Opus, and they are just the most lovely brushes I've ever owned. I think the biggest thing they are that maybe Winsor & Newton aren't is just forgiving. like, again, I'm not a highly talented or skilled painter, and I would go through more Winsor and Newton brushes than perhaps I ought to have, because they suffer, and genuinely they suffer under the hand of people who don't look after them properly, like me. Like, they don't respond well to being treated roughly. They have very little kind of bounce back once you knock it out of them once. Whereas I've found with these Artis Opus ones, like, they're still on the higher end of brush. You still need to look after them. Like, especially the larger sizes, the kind of 3 and up, they can very quickly, I found, throw a warp. And you can see that with this too, actually. If I get that in focus, just sort of slowly rotate it, you can see how it leans pretty heavily one way. And that's not uncommon in really high quality brushes. The reason being that they hold on to quite a lot of moisture, and compared to the relative weight of the bristles, that can be quite heavy, and that causes them to throw a warp. It's no big drama, but I do find that you have to just occasionally, knock it back, put in some brush soap, and really just try and make sure that, as much as possible, you aren't allowing them to sit in that warp. Otherwise, you can get it can get a little bit extreme at times, and eventually, obviously, the brush is going to become unusable if it goes too far. Now I'm kind of wondering if I go a little further with this, or if I call it a day. But I feel like I'm just going to go a little bit further. Again, though, I'm just going to pick out the kind of absolute top bits. I'm not going to go too deep into any of this. Just pick out those few bits that belong here, right on the highest points. There we go. Little insight into my inner monologue there when painting, making absolutely no sense, but I feel like we all do that a little bit, talk to ourselves and maybe figure things out as we hobby. That's part of the fun, right? When the answer comes back as no, I can take that up with a professional of some sort, I'm sure. There we go. Now with this, I'm sorely tempted to go a little further, but this is around about the point where I usually start to remind myself that more highlights is not always a good thing. Actually, I've already gone a good deal higher than I'd really intended to. And in fact, I've got a little bit of a darker contrast problem. What I might try and do is go in and just take out some of the Payne's grey, because it's just keeping it a little bit too dark in some of the recesses. I just want some slightly more blue shadows. There we are. Bring that up, bring that up. Yeah. Like, it's quite stark, but I quite like it in some ways. apologies, I'm just being pursued by an employer on on the old mobile phone, but that's fine. Let's maybe leave. What I might do is leave the cloak for a little while now. Come back to it when it's dry and the shine's gone off it, and just see if I want to take it a little bit further. I feel like I might want to. I might even actually want to knock back some of the highlights that I've put in place there. Some of them are just a bit more drastic than I would like them to be. But we'll come to that at the time. Next up, I want to start looking at some of this metal. So for this, I'm going to stick with the Pro Acryl train. These are very recent additions to my Pro Acryl collection. Dark silver, dark bronze from the Matte Sexfish series, and bronze. Metallics are paints that I haven't used from Pro Acryl yet. So let's see how we go. I'm going to start with the dark silver, I think. Let's just pop the lid off and get these there. Be great if, again, if anyone's got any tips, please let me know in the comments about using these metallics. I always find metallic paints are a little bit hit and miss. Like, I'm a big fan of Scale 75, but I always struggle with their metallics. Like, there's lots of people who kind of aren't keen on the slightly jelly medium that they use in their paints generally. I don't have a problem with it, with the exception of their metallics. For whatever reason, the moment I reach for one of their metallics, everything goes wrong. Which is probably more of a statement about me than it is about their paints, to be fair. But I mean, I think, you know, GW Metallics have their own issues. They're really nice looking, but I always find they just impart so much texture. You know, they're not to my taste. But yeah, the Pro Acryl runs, I've heard wonderful things, so I'm hoping to be really impressed. You know, no pressure. Let's grab a little bit of water into those. So, I mean, first, wow, I mean, yeah, first immediate thoughts are this is a thick paint. Like, I'm all for good coverage and reasonable, reasonable thickness out of the bottle, but this feels very thick. And considering I've got it on a wet palette, that's a little... I don't want to say it's concerning, but to me it is. If I'm honest, blimey, that is really thick. Interesting. Yeah, so if you use Pro Acryl Metallics, let me know what you think. I don't dislike them, but I think I'm going to go for adding a bit of medium, which I haven't done with any other Pro Acryl paints, actually. I really like this Magic Mix by Joe Sonja, sort of aimed at loaded brush painting more than it is miniature painting, I guess. I usually only use it when I want to glaze stuff, but I kind of feel like this needs a lot of thinning, which feels very odd for a metallic paint. And that has immediately lost all its opacity. How interesting. Okay, that's not a problem. Let's try again. Is there a middle ground here? I would hope there is. Did I just add too much medium? Okay, yeah. I think that was I think that was purely a user error situation with a small amount of medium that actually has a really nice, let me try and get it in focus, like a really nice flow. Yeah, I really quite like that actually. The With a little bit of medium added, I feel like it's a little bit like the Vallejo metal color, which I know are very popular. Certainly, they've been my go-to for a very long time. The only thing that puts me off them more and more these days is I've got the alcohol-based ones, and that's just a pain in the ass, to be perfectly honest with you. Yeah, there's no two ways of putting that really. Needing to dilute paint and or clean your brushes in alcohol is annoying, and it smells. And if I'm honest, the acrylic alternatives now have come so far and look so good. It's very difficult to justify that extra work, in my opinion. In my opinion. Yeah, I think that's sort of where I'd stand on that. But I quite like that. Little bit of a dilution issue aside, that looks really nice. A little bit of medium, a little bit of water. I think, yeah, it's going to be a bit of a kind of new paint. Let's figure it out approach from me on them. But overall, again, I feel like Pro Acryl as a line, in the same way as these Artis Opus brushes are quite forgiving, I would say the same thing of Pro Acryl paints. They give you a lot of scope for making an error and being able to correct it, and I really like that. I like a product that kind of considers the fact that yes, there are these incredible miniature painters in the world who can capture these incredible effects with great ease or apparent ease. Obviously, there's a lot of work that goes into being that good at anything. But there is also a kind of, there's those of us who make up the majority of the hobby who are not, um, you know, not god tier painters. We very much fall into the, I want to have a go when I've got a spare 20 minutes, but that's about it bracket. And I get a little frustrated when, like, I want there to be products for everyone, but I get a little frustrated when products that are kind of marketed as for everyone, in fact, expect that level of time commitment. I kind of wish, like with Chimera, I think actually they do a very good job of saying, hey, look, these paints may not be for you. They require X, Y, and Z skills. They require the willingness to mix colours. They require, all this other stuff. I really like that. I wish more paint brands would just be more honest about who their product's for. And who's going to get the most out of their product. I think that's the thing that always really strikes me, is the fact that you're not really losing any business when you do that for the people you turn away, because the people who you turn away by saying things like that are the people who would buy your product, not like it, and then probably tell everyone, but it's not a good product, because it's not reasonable, really, to expect people to what's the word? To protect you in that way as a business. You kind of have to expect that people are going to be ruthlessly honest when something isn't right for them, and silent when it goes really well for them, when it is a good fit. And I feel like there's maybe a bit more of a market than people think for that entry tier product. That's always what I thought Army Painter was, if I'm honest. Which is why I was really excited to try it when I got those D&D branded ones. That different brand name, obviously, but where they've got that Army Painter bit listed on the side. I kind of thought, oh great, at least I'll be able to try these out. And as I said, maybe they are aimed at entry level, but if they are, they're giving people a really rough time of it. Like, in my mind, if I was going to do a kind of what paints are great for entry level painters, I'd be thinking, right, I want good out of the bottle opacity. I want something that can grow with people, that's not going to limit them longer term, but right now does just work. I definitely don't want something that requires, a great deal of thinking when it comes to mixing colours. I think, you want stuff that just works. And I found that that's just not what those paints were giving me. They were giving me, a pretty hard time just trying to do basic stuff. See, I've switched now to trying to pick out some of the little bronze bits. I don't want to do kind of gold on any of these. I really do want them to be like a bronze colour. So I've gone for this dark bronze, because I find so many bronze colours now they're gold. They're very, very bright. And I used to love the GW colour tin bits back in the hex pots. And I want to say the clip pots as well. But I was kind of gutted on my return to the hobby to find that this paint no longer exists. And doesn't really have an alternative. Which really shocked me, because it was always the only colour of its type. Yes, it had this kind of bronzy metallic look to it, but it also had a good deal of like purple and black in there. It was really quite unlike anything else. It was a phenomenal base colour to just about anything. Like a really nice, if you wanted a dark metallic base, it was just a beautiful colour. And it's funny, like, I've had a look on eBay trying to find old bottles of tin bits, and when they do come up, my god, clearly I'm not the only person who loved this paint, because they go for a small fortune. This is my way of saying, if you've got a bottle of tin bits at home that you're not using, don't put it on eBay. Give me a call. No, I'm just... well, I say I'm joking, actually. If you have a bottle of tin bits at home, give me a shout. I will buy it from you. At a reasonable price, because it is only a bottle of paint. I think sometimes the eBay world loses its mind over stuff. Like, I love tin bits. I think it's a great colour. I am not paying 40 quid for a bottle of paint. Like, that is just not happening. Certainly not an old bottle of paint, anyway. But and maybe this is kind of what's driven my move towards Pro Acryl and AK sort of 3rd gen. For one thing, they are just lovely paints, but also the GW line seems to have, like, and I get why they've done it. It seems to have become very directly linked to what do you need to paint our miniatures, our factions. There is a very strong, very clear focus on that, and it's always been there. Don't get me wrong, but some of the stuff that's gone that did exist, or that does exist now that didn't before, kind of suggests that they're leaning into it quite a lot more. And to me, it's kind of left some fairly sizable gaps, like Timbits. Now, Timbits, it's not going to be useful in many scenarios, I agree. But when it was useful, it was the only paint on the market that did that thing. Now, I mean, yeah, I really like this dark bronze. This is a lovely colour. It's not Timbits. I know there's like Tinny Tin and things like that. It's not Timbits. Like, that was genuinely one of those rarities where I have yet to see anyone even come close to recapturing what that is, and get that colour onto a miniature. I've just not seen it happen. So I've added a little bit of that dark bronze onto that central armour decoration there. I can't really tell what it is because there's the skeletal arms in the way. But again, I like the idea of there being some decoration on there. And actually, with all this in place, I'm kind of torn about these horns. Whether to got these kind of big horns on the helmet, and I'm like, would they just be big bronze sort of sculpture pieces? Would they be actual horns? Like, the logical part of my brain is like, you don't put horns on a helmet, but that again, I kind of like the idea that maybe for some bizarre reason they do put horns on helmets where this guy comes from. So I'm thinking maybe I'll paint them as bone. Why not? Maybe just a very different kind of bone to the actual bone we go for the skeleton in the end. So I think now we're at the point where I want to get some more silver on these on the skeletons, chainmail, and these more sort of silver plates, and maybe get the first highlight on the bronze as well. We've only got 14 minutes left of the designated 1 hour that I set out to spend on this mini today. So I think I might try and get the bronze done, but that might actually be ambitious. So we will see what we'll do. If all else fails, we got the bulk of the cloak done. We got some other colours on. That's not bad for an hour of hobby. And I say, I'm certain there's nothing really of any value here, but it's doing this stream has made me sit, it's made me paint, it's made me think about what I'm doing, and who knows, maybe if you found this and you're watching it, you found my ramblings mildly entertaining. If so, as I say, I think maybe try and do this once a week. I like the idea of doing this once a week. The reality, I know, of streaming on a regular cadence is not quite as nice as the idea of doing it, but I feel like making some time, making it a formal thing in the schedule, will really help me to make sure it actually happens, to make sure I have some time set aside in my week for hobby, because I'm sure there are people, assuming someone's watching this, there are people who feel the same way, that it's very difficult to make space for hobby in a working week, to ensure that you've got a little bit of time just dedicated to, I mean, like in this case, like painting a skeleton for no reason other than to think, yeah, do you know what, I painted that skeleton. There's no value in painting this guy. He's not going into an army. He's not gonna win any painting competitions. He's just a miniature that I've had sat around waiting for paint for way too long. And it's just nice to nice to spend some time doing that. So if nothing else, today has been a winner in that regard. But my ambition with the channel more broadly is to do a kind of I don't know, do a kind of the hobby from the, I don't know, decry myself the normal person's point of view, but like, I'm not a competition painter, I'm not a great tactician when playing war games or anything like that. I'm just someone who really enjoys painting miniatures, enjoys playing war games, hasn't got to do it as much as they want to for the past kind of 10 years, and now is trying to make some time around work in life to just fit this stuff in. I'm not sure how clear in this camera the bronze is, but it's a really nice colour. Like, I'm really quite surprised at how good or how well that's come out. Just with those two colours, dark bronze and bronze, has created a really nice, just very simple kind of base and highlight. I was kind of thinking, oh, I'll need to make sure I get a wash on that at some point, but I almost don't want to do that. Like, I might mix in a little bit of light silver with the bronze just to bring it up, just at the very, very edges. But beyond that, I might not. I don't think I will wash that at all, to be honest. And that looks really nice. This is somewhat reminiscent, as I was mentioning before, of that kind of Timbitsy feel, that depth and that warmth of what bronze convey, and it's why I wanted everything else to be so desaturated. I want it to really, the metal will look richer for the rest of the miniature being so desaturated. And my hope is that when I go in at a later stage and put the glow, that we can have that reflected up onto that kind of bronzy brass finish. Yeah, I think that's okay. The cloak remains a little bit tricky. I'm not wonderfully happy with it. Specifically this highlight along the bottom here, it's just a bit thick and clumsy, so I think I'm going to break that up. More like what I've got on the front, but again, this is a bit thick and clumsy as well. There's a theme developing here, thick and clumsy. But yeah, I feel like there's enough there to have made an hour's worth of work worth it. Let's try and get the silver in before we round out this session. Just need to grab that off my paint rack. I think that's going to be silver. Yeah, there we go. That's the silver. And again, with the my dark bronze has run off the side of my wet palette, and it hits the edge of the paper, goes into the sponge, and then goes pew all over the water and the side of your reservoir. That's always a good moment, right? I enjoy cleaning that up after I get off stream, but that's all right. Let's peel this lid off. This is the one thing I have had. All these metallics, I've not had it before, and it might just be a batch thing. The little stickers on the inside of the Pro Acryl packs that they use to seal them, or Pro Acryl bottles that they use to seal them, they've all come off. Not had that before, and that's the right pain, to be honest, but in the grand scheme of things, totally worth it for this quality of paint. I must admit, talking about it on here, I hadn't really realised how much I was enjoying using their paints, but they really are lovely. As I say, forgiving, which is the biggest thing for me. I'm never stuck being worried about what it's going to do on the palette or on the miniature or on the brush. As I say, the metallics do seem a little bit different. But metallics are always going to be, I think, distinctly different from the rest of any range. I think that's true of pretty much all providers. Whether it's, as I said before, whether it's scale 75, where they're the one group of scale 75 paints, that I struggle to get on with, or whether it's Citadel, where I mean their metallics are kind of famed for the issues that they have. But no, I think overall these have been very enjoyable to paint with. It's probably how I would describe it, and that seems like very much like a lackluster review, but actually for me that's the whole point. I want paints that are just enjoyable to use. I don't want to have to fight them. I don't want to have to work that hard. There we are. And again, this is something I'm maybe not sure on. I might watch this back later to try and get a feel on. But like how when we talk about thick and clumsy, that would have taken the biscuit. Let's try something a little bit more finesse. There we go. But yeah, it's really nice, really easy to work with. That last highlight just seems to have just worked out. Not perfect, but better than nothing. But let's see if we can get the silver onto some of these areas before we finish up. Now my plan here is very much to pick out some of the key edges with this brighter silver, then wash all of the chainmail back down, and then re-pick the edges with some more of that really, really bright silver. But not so on the actual plate armour. Here instead I just want to stipple in some ever so slight highlights. Like I got to say, like I always really enjoy miniatures like this for being able to stipple in and have that be the finished effect. It can be tricky, I always find, as a technique to use, just because it does create that kind of slightly textured finish. But I find with metallic paints, it's just one of those few times where a little bit of texture can help. Like metallics have this somewhat annoying, I find anyway, thing about sorry, had a moment there. They have this annoying thing about going really smooth even when there should be texture, and they take texture really well. Typically, obviously, that's why they were used very heavily, or they used to be anyway, for dry brushing. I know it's kind of less the case these days, but like I find now that if I stipple all my metallics on, they take on just some super interesting kind of marks, as if they've been damaged, and especially given the look and feel of this miniature more broadly, it just sort of suits it makes for a nice finish without having to wash or dry brush or anything like that. And that is about an hour. So the next stages for this, I guess, are some washes on that chainmail, the haft, the leather. This plume, I need to decide what colour this plume's going to be, whether or not it's going to be something that stands out or whether it's going to be something that blends in. I need to figure out how I'm going to finalise this cape as well, because I'm not really happy with the finish on it. So I can figure that out later. But hey, hopefully if you found this, you found it fun to watch. I would genuinely love your feedback on how I can make the stream better in terms of setup or anything like that. And of course, there's a couple of moments in there where I asked for advice around paint. I'd really love to hear it. Getting back into the hobby after so long is a little bit tricky. So I'd love to hear your thoughts around, are the issues that I'm having normal? Have you had similar things, and how have you got around them? But thanks so much for joining, and hopefully I'll see you in the next stream.